been about a year since Halloween Ends came out. I've had a year to sit on the film, as well as some of the other Halloween sequels that I hadn't checked out until Halloween Ends came out, thinking it would make me like the film more. And so with the Halloween season coming up, I thought it'd be a great time to rewatch these films, sit down and talk about one of my favorite franchises of all time, Halloween. Michael Myers is easily one of the most iconic horror villains of all time, and although the Halloween franchise has had a lot of bad sequels, it also has some great horror movies in the mix. Everybody has their own taste and own personal preference in what a Halloween sequel should look like, so we can all share our rankings together and have fun disagreeing and celebrate when we can agree. With that being said, I'd love to hear your ranking in the comments below, and with that out of the way, let's get right into it. First, we have Halloween 1978. You know where this is going, right up to horror classic. This film, looking back at it, holding up today, does not have the most complex or deep storyline. It's, as Ghostface said, it's a guy in a white mask who stalks the babysitters. The most humanizing and grounded part of this movie is easily Dr. Loomis, with some great dialogue talking about evil and how it can manifest into a shape of a person like Michael. Always giving us hints that Michael Myers has a supernatural element or has a supernatural edge to him without specifically defining it, which is an element that is highly interesting to a lot of people. Having a sense of mystery to the character, it leaves the movie with a very specific flavor and tone. It feels realistic, it feels like a crime thriller in a way, and still has some very terrifying imagery that's unique. John Carpenter and what he did with this film was revolutionary for the genre. It defined the genre, probably one of the first horror movies I ever saw alongside H2O and Halloween 2, so there's a lot of nostalgia watching this film, and it is easily my favorite Halloween film. A lot of people say this is where it should have ended, but it didn't, so let's get into the next movie. So we have Halloween 2, and this one I put kind of in between good and great. If we're talking slasher movie standards, I think this is a very strong film. The kills are much more brutal than in the original, although maybe not quite as gruesome or gory as Friday the 13th or Nightmare on Elm Street, but as far as Halloween sequels go, especially out of the earlier films, this one has some great kills. The tone is very consistent with the original. A lot of people watch this right after the original and they bleed very well together. It's got an epic finale with some iconic imagery that could have ended the franchise here as well. You do have Laurie hung up in a hospital the entire movie, really doesn't have anything to do until the last 10 to 15 minutes, so I would say Loomis is once again the character that kind of carries you through the film. There is a revelation that Michael and Laurie are siblings, which I've never personally had a problem with, but I can't see why. It would take some of the mystery from the character and his motivations away. John Carpenter has gone on the record several times stating he hates this movie, so it seems like fans have been a little kinder than the creators, but nonetheless, a solid Halloween entry. Then we have Halloween 3, Season of the Witch. This one I did not see until after Halloween Ends came out. Lots of people saying that they grew up watching Season of the Witch, so they absolutely loved Halloween Ends, and I thought if I had the same experience with Season of the Witch, I'd look back at Halloween Ends differently. But for the longest time before, I never wanted to check this movie out because Michael Myers simply wasn't in it. That's why I watch a Halloween film. But if you take this film, remove the Halloween title, you have a classic 80s horror film with some very original ideas. It strays very far away from Loomis and Michael and Laurie, a very strange, wacky kind of film that on paper, if you read it out loud to someone who's never seen the film, they probably would have a hard time believing you. A very pleasant surprise to me. It's got some corporate corruption, some child mind control, some strong lead characters, a very good Halloween film. Then we have Halloween 4, Return of Michael Myers. The studio decided to bring Michael back after some not-so-hot reception after Season of the Witch, and it kind of retcons the ending to Halloween 2 to a certain degree. They kill off Laurie Strode off screen, so right away there is some weird elements to this movie. Michael's mask also looks nothing like the original. Maybe not the worst out of the franchise. It's decent enough, I guess, but not very scary looking or iconic, although we do have a good Michael actor in this movie, and I would say maybe even a slight improvement over Halloween 2's Michael, but we have the introduction to our new main lead character in Jamie, which in this film, Michael is out to kill the newest family member on the block. There's some more mysterious supernatural elements thrown into the mix without it being clearly defined. Loomis is starting to decline from a mental health standpoint, I would say, in this film. He's a little more strange, a little more eccentric, but this movie has a great ending, setting up what could have been a very special Halloween sequel. You could have the mob mentality displayed in here much more coherent way than in Halloween Kills. I would say this is a good to great Halloween film. And then we have Halloween 5, Revenge of Michael Myers. And honestly, this film in every possible way is a step down from Halloween 4. I don't think this is the worst film out of the franchise, although it is to me the most boring, just the most plain as could be. Back to basics with Michael, with Jamie. Jamie is now a mute. Michael is back in the opening with Michael floating down the river. I actually didn't mind him surviving Halloween 4, but you're killing off main characters, not really giving them a ceremonial or satisfactory end. Things just kind of happen. You have a couple of cops in here that are just absolute clowns. The kills are boring and watered down and forgettable. The mask is atrocious. Loomis is starting to go crazy and crazier to the point where he's not really even all that likable anymore. Donald Pleasance is, but Dr. Loomis as a character, not so much. Easily one of the worst Halloween films to me. Not bottom of the barrel, but boring as paper. They tried introducing the Man in Black, which could have maybe been interesting depending on the direction they decided to go, but ends up just being kinda limited and feeling very rushed. Then we have Halloween 6, The Curse of Michael Myers, and I'm just going to talk about the producer's cut and the director's cut because both are very flawed. Both have some different ideas, some new takes to the franchise. I don't mind when they decide to lean more supernatural or more human with Michael in some of the sequels, but for me, this just wasn't the way. Introducing a cult, introducing sexual motivations for Michael, just not for me. It might not have been as boring just because you have some very strange performances, especially from Paul Rudd, who I love as an actor anyways. Some new characters that feel kind of paper thin, kind of two different versions of ridiculous endings. The producer's cut I feel like is more coherent story-wise. It's just not a story I like all that much. I think they make Michael a little too dirty, yet also feel kind of irrelevant, and have some more interesting ideas on paper, but execution was just not there. The Mask was a slight improvement, but this film doesn't really sit any higher for me than Halloween 5. I'd say a bad Halloween sequel. Then we have Halloween H2O 20 years later. This was the first film that I ever saw that in a way retconned or ignored sequels inside of a franchise that it's a part of, and yet still tying into at least one or two of the other films. This really was, in a way, a legacy sequel. I personally am a massive Scream fan, and a lot of those 90s horror movies were some of the first horror movies I ever saw. After the Kevin Williamson and Wes Craven Scream success, every horror movie seemed to pull that direction, and in this case, it totally works for me. This was one of the first horror movies I ever saw, like I said, after Halloween 1 and 2, and I absolutely adore this movie. The kills are a little more pulled back. That changing mask looks pretty awful, especially when you see Michael's eyes, but from a story standpoint, a tone and aesthetic standpoint, it's a fantastic film. Execution was even better, but the performance and the writing for Laurie Strode in this film was probably the most believable and likable out of all the films. Easily my favorite Laurie, easily a great Halloween movie, with probably the best ending since the original. Halloween 1, Halloween 2, and Halloween H2O is my go-to Halloween trilogy. Then we have Halloween Resurrection. Now, if you know the backstory of this film, it was kind of like a spec script. They decided to turn this movie about a bunch of kids going to a spooky house with a bunch of webcams everywhere, and it just so happens to end up being Michael Myers' house. And right there is where the problem lies, or at least one of the several in this film. It was never intended to be a Halloween film. You can kill off our main character in the first 15 minutes. After that amazing finale in H2O, you undo that. You got Busta Rhymes doing karate, punching Michael in the nuts, setting him on fire. You have every 90s, early 2000s cliche in this movie. None of the wit or the charm from H2O carries over to this film. I can easily see why it's a lot of people's least favorite Halloween movie. From a production standpoint, it might be one of the worst other than Halloween 6, just because that film was edited to death and reworked. But Halloween Resurrection does have a little bit of charm to me personally, that it's so bad it can sometimes, not all the time, but sometimes be so bad it's enjoyable. Like, I just laugh at how stupid and ridiculous the sequences I'm seeing in front of my eyes with these characters are. It's unbelievable that this film was greenlit. If you watch it as a Halloween comedy or a Halloween spoof, you might be able to get some sick and twisted enjoyment out of it like me, but as a serious Halloween film, this is just bad. Then we have Rob Zombie's Halloween movie, a much more back to basics, back to the original. And if we're talking about the theatrical cut with no rape escape, I'd say this is an okay Halloween movie. There's nothing all that original about it story-wise. It pulls from the original Halloween film, but we don't really see Laurie until like 45 minutes into this reboot. Prior to that, you have a deep look into Michael's childhood, his living situation, and a lot of his motivations are revealed in this movie. To me, this was the most human version of Michael we had ever seen, which to that regard, I applaud for doing something totally different than the original. This just seems like a crazy guy who could actually live in our world and is just really big and strong. One of the scariest Michaels we've ever had. The mask, I think, is one of the best out of the franchise, although it hasn't aged as well as I would have liked. It's very grungy, but the hair is kind of crazy, and about 45 minutes in, we basically just get a revamped, faster-paced version of the original movie, with some recycled kills and a lot of recycled story elements. I don't really like this version of Laurie or her family all that much. I can take it or leave them. I don't really go back to this film all that often, but when I do, I can get some enjoyment out of some of the brutality and some of the creative decisions. It's just when Rob Zombie gets too much creative control, all the characters become so unlikable, and the movie can be really grotesque. There's way too many shots of women topless, being stabbed or choked. It just almost seems like this Michael's sexually motivated, and if you throw the rape escape scene in there, then the movie itself just has an icky, gross feel to it. I can understand why a lot of people don't like this movie. For me, I do have some nostalgia with it. I saw the movie in theaters, so I saw the theatrical cut, which I do like a hell of a lot more than the director's cut, but it hasn't aged the best. I don't think it's the worst Halloween movie. It's good, not great. Then we have Rob Zombie's Halloween 2, and once again, talking about the theatrical cut, you can put the director's cut in there as well. I think this one is a clear sign Rob Zombie's basically just getting more and more control over this movie. He adds more brutality, more kills, and just kind of some more strange new plot points. Loomis, who I actually liked in the first Rob Zombie Halloween movie, does a complete 180 from who he was in the first film. Laurie and the other side characters, to me personally, are just really unlikable in this film, other than Brad Dourif, of course. You got this weird vision of Michael's mother and a pale horse popping up throughout the movie. In one of the cuts, you have Michael speaking as an adult, which is just so wrong on so many levels. I mean, especially when you choose to give him just the word die as his one line. It just feels so cheesy and just a waste. There's some creative decisions here, so I will applaud that. Some new ideas to the franchise, so I can almost applaud them for that as well. But the ideas were just so out there, it's so different that it doesn't really fit even with the first Rob Zombie Halloween movie to me. So it's just a bad film. Then we have Halloween 2018, and in a way this is really very similar to the original as well as H2O, which I think is a reason why some people honestly don't like this film. To me, this is a great Halloween sequel. James Jude Courtney is legendary as Michael Myers. I think he's the best since Nick Castle and gives Nick Castle a run for his money. Maybe not as brutal as the Rob Zombie Michael Myers, but his kills are far more creative. He's not as grotesque. The film doesn't feel as gross to watch. Feels like a great continuation of the original film. I think from a production and director's standpoint, this is also one of the strongest films in the franchise. I love what they did with Laurie. She was very Sarah Connor, and I do think that it actually makes sense from a PTSD or anxiety standpoint, although the way she acts in public is maybe a little questionable at times. You have kind of a new Loomis character, which I thought was really cheesy, but almost the entire cast of this film, I am a fan of their performance and their characters. I love this movie. It's just a shame what happened with the sequels. Speaking of them, we have Halloween Kills, and I hope I don't lose everybody on this, but I actually like this movie to a degree. From a carnage standpoint, from the violence standpoint, it was disturbing, entertaining, sometimes funny, gory, creative, and brutal. Notice I'm a big fan of creativity. This Michael was angry and twisted, especially when he's stabbing and placing knife after knife after knife into that guy's back while turning his head sideways like he's admiring his work. I love the little details like that they added to Michael in this movie. Unlike the Rob Zombie films, the way I took it when watching this movie for the first time was that by the end, after Michael had been stabbed and shot 25 times and he gets up and he kills everyone, I thought, okay, that's confirmation that this version of Michael is in fact supernatural. He's basically Jason Voorhees. So now I think, okay, that is something very different, much more defined, and a little ballsy. It's probably going to piss a lot of people off. This Michael is brutal, while never crossing over to the unwatchable or sexually motivated regions like some of the previous sequels. However, as much as I love the carnage candy, from a story standpoint, this movie suffers so badly. The characters, especially the town folk, are just incredibly stupid. Laurie is borderline useless in this movie. They repeat my biggest issue with Halloween 2, which was just throwing our main character into a hospital bed. You have the moment where the mob mentality is killing the wrong person. It just seems so stupid that anyone could ever believe that was a 6'4" Michael Myers. But with introducing the supernatural elements, having a great amount of kills, I actually did like Little John and Big John as well. Kills that were some of the best in the franchise. It's a film that ended up balancing itself out, leaning much more positive than negative for me personally. I really enjoy it. I think it's a good Halloween sequel. Some awful dialogue and writing. It's kind of a guilty pleasure for me. Last and least, Halloween Ends. I think this is bottom of the bottom. I'm going to try to keep this short and respectful because I know there's a cult following to this film, but I'm not physically capable about talking about this film without full-on ranting. This film makes me the most mad out of, I think, any film I've ever seen. I don't think it's the worst film ever made from a directed or acted or produced level, but this film from start to finish just makes me so frustrated, especially from a character standpoint and overall themes. Like, I can distinguish the themes in a Rob Zombie Halloween film, but anyone I talk to about Halloween Ends and what the connection is between Corey and the town or Corey and Michael, I get a different answer or 5 different answers. I've heard it's the mask that gives them the power, that Michael ascends with each kill, that Michael sees himself in Corey, that he visually saw the memories of Corey killing a child so that he makes them alike for some reason, even though one was on purpose and one was an accident. There's problems with all of these theories, and I do like some suspense and some mystery, not gonna lie, but not with 4 or 5 different reasonings you've introduced. Laurie and the supporting cast also didn't really have anything to do that felt all that special or memorable to me. The kills felt unearned and recycled from the original and Halloween 2018 and even Kills. Once we finally get to Michael and Laurie seeing each other, 1 hour and 30 frustrating minutes later, we get a semi-decent fight, but you can notice Michael's hand when it's pinned down to the table shifting from forehand to backhand. It's kind of laughable. A lackluster ending that was totally unsatisfying. It's a way to kill him, yeah, but you spent months marketing that fight and it was 8 minutes. We got an hour and a half what could have been a really cool anthology spin-off film, but instead took up the finale to a 40-year franchise, introducing an unlikable character to me, making me think this is where the franchise is going to go or could go, and then you predictably have him stab himself, Laurie's granddaughter walk in predictably, and then think predictably it was Laurie. And then she runs off and they never talk about it again. Like Corey telling her he murdered someone, she's just like, there, and rubs his arm, and they never talk about it again. Just a bunch of unsatisfying questions, really frustrating ending to a trilogy that reminds me so much of the Star Wars sequel trilogy, where every sequel retcons things from the previous, but unfortunately, this was all the same director. But I have to stop there, or this video will just continue for way too long. And like I said, it's not the worst movie of all time, and I respect anyone who likes it. I'm just giving some of my thoughts on these films, but I'd love to hear your ranking down in the comments below. Out of 13 films, I like or love like 8 of them, so some of the others I could still watch and they don't make me as mad as Halloween Ends does, but I am a fan, that's why I get mad. If you enjoyed, we are a small channel, so I would ask you to like and subscribe, as it really does help more than you know. Thanks for watching, and you can check out my ranking of A Nightmare on Elm Street films somewhere down there. Thanks for watching. Have a great day.